Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness channel. I'm Millie, and I am here to give you your forecast for the full moon in Aquarius taking place on August 19th. As always, thank you all so much for your comments, your like, and your subscribes. It means so much to me when you all share your personal stories and what's going on in your lives. Remember, astrology gives context to what's happening in our lives, but our lives also give context to the understanding of astrology. So they go hand in hand. Um, if you would like to continue sharing, share in the comments. I'm still doing mini readings if you share your sun, moon, rising. And in this case, I'll do it for the full moon in Aquarius. Now, this is an interesting full moon, and it is a full moon that really seals off the month of August before we move into September. Now, in September, I am going to share with you all the eclipse guide of the eclipse season of September and October. It drops on September 1st with the launch of my new website, so make sure that you sign up for the waitlist so you're one of the first people to know when this drops. The eclipse guide is going to be filled with additional lessons around the full moons. It's going to be filled with a workbook and guided meditations for each lunar event. Either get on the wait list below, or here is a QR code that you can take a snapshot with on your phone and sign up there. So, as always, let's recap in order to understand where we're headed with this full moon in Aquarius. We're coming from the week of August 12th through the 18th. And as I mentioned in that forecast, which is last week's forecast, that entire week was a buildup to this full moon in Aquarius of August 19th. And man, have I received a lot of DMs, text messages, conversations with friends, with clients that are very much aligned with the buildup of this full moon. So, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that if you are feeling like this energy feels off, or it's a bit tumultuous, or it feels like a bit much, yes, it is all very much activated because, as I mentioned for last week's forecast, we were really moving, especially through some significant parts of that Mercury retrograde. Mercury went from retrograding in Virgo to retrograding back in Leo, right? Activating that Leo energy. And over the weekend, but specifically on Sunday the 18th, Mercury comes together with the sun. That is known as the Sun-Mercury cazimi that happens every single Mercury retrograde. This can be a moment of clarity or acceptance of something, but that which we are gaining clarity around, that which we are gaining acceptance around, has been a buildup for quite some time. Now, does this clarity necessarily mean that we feel comfortable with all of this? Does this clarity necessarily mean a solution? For some people, I think it can. For others, I think the transition that they're currently experiencing in their lives, or the restlessness of wanting a transition in their lives, and maybe they just don't know how to get there, when to start, or things are moving very slowly, that's where we can feel this internal tension. And this full moon in Aquarius highlights that internal tension, but it's asking us to really first, before we can move forward, before we can fully land in this either new reality that we're living in our lives or the new reality that we want to live in our lives, we're being asked to just take it slowly, right? Transitionary times take time. It's really interesting. I have one client who has a new job, right? And she's a new mom and she's kind of juggling the transition in her career, the transition of identity, being a new mom. All of those things take time. I have another client who went through a significant shift in her family life and set some really strong boundaries with her family in a way that she had never done before. And that has truly paid off in her life. But the life that she's living now, with those newly established boundaries, looks very different. And so she's looking at how her life used to even function a few months ago and really looking and saying, who was that? What life was that? Did I really live that? And so one of the things that I've noticed is that there can feel a little bit of distortion, right? Not knowing what's real or what feels real. I think our nervous systems are very activated right now for a few reasons. I think one, again, anytime we are in a period of transition, whether it's external, like a new job or a new home, our our nervous systems are going to get activated. It doesn't go with the flow of life that it's usually accustomed to. If this is an internal transition of figuring out who you are now, right, and who you are in your closest relationships, all of this activates the nervous system because different parts of us, younger versions of us, get very much activated, right? It's about understanding that when we shift the way that we function in the world, our role changes in the world, our role changes in relationship, and we even have to become aware and used to no longer falling into the role that we're used to with some people. Because of the pace of life and just the world that we live in, I think a lot of times we can forget that these transitionary times take time. It takes time for our minds and our nervous system to catch up to what the soul has known all along. The soul signed up for some lessons here. It signed up for a very specific journey because it wanted to have very specific experiences with certain situations, events, and people. And the soul has always known that. The soul came here with a purpose. And so our minds, our egos, our identities are wrapped around perhaps a certain period of time in our life or a certain career, a certain title, a certain way of being, a certain way of doing family. Our egos get very much attached to that. And so we are, because we've been so activated and affected by Uranus, it's like a ripping away. It's like a ripping away from this part of our life that can feel sticky. That's one of the words that has come up for me personally. It feels sticky to come out of this relationship dynamic that I've had with my family for so long. It feels very sticky, right? I think another word can be enmeshed. And the realization of, oh wow, this is harder than I thought. Because another thing that we begin to realize is that it's not just about the other, it's also about ourselves and how much we played into a particular role, how much we've held on to playing a particular role, to being a particular way in our lives. Look, I think it's worth mentioning, and I think it's important to actually mention that all of this commotion and perhaps to some chaos was very much activated by the second full moon in Capricorn of July 21st. And I strongly believe that the reason for that is that it was a full moon in Capricorn at the 29th degree of Capricorn, giving us a forecast, right, of Pluto retrograding back into the 29th degree of Capricorn in just a couple of weeks. And that full moon was conjunct Pluto. And I really invite you to think about the weekend of the 17th and the 18th, because the moon also conjunct Pluto that weekend before perfecting as a full moon in Aquarius on Monday, August 19th. It's very easy for us, especially if for those of us who only study Western astrology, to forget how important the role of the moon is, because Western astrology tends to lean more towards masculine energy, the doing, the doing, the ego, the light, the production of things, which is all solar energy, right? But when we follow the moon, which is why I like to make so much emphasis around it, which is why I'm making such a big deal and an emphasis on eclipse season, because that is all lunar energy. And quite frankly, as an astrologer, I think that our lives truly revolve around eclipses, which is why I'm creating that eclipse guide. Eclipses are times in which we experience the most significant internal or external and or both changes in our lives. And so every time in between is for us to really become mindful, aware, to really be present with those lessons, because we go from eclipse season to eclipse season. Now, I think that's a very personal observation as a professional astrologer. Different astrologers focus on different things, but quite frankly, I think our evolution revolves around eclipses. So back to this energy. Ever since that full moon in Capricorn of July 21st, there has been an unraveling. And the closer we've gotten to this full moon in Aquarius, perhaps the more shaky that unraveling has become. But because this is a full moon in Aquarius ruled by Uranus, and Uranus actually plays a massive role in this full moon, Uranus is about breaking the mold. It's about breaking a pattern, breaking our own rules that intentionally, unintentionally, consciously, or unconsciously we have been living by. And that is a transition in itself. So, with that said, let's get started. This full moon in Aquarius is at 27 degrees Aquarius, and which means that the sun is at 27 degrees Leo, the moon is at 27 degrees Aquarius, and right next to the sun is Mercury retrograde in Leo at 26 degrees. This is important because the sun in opposition to the moon every single month, full moon of that month. But with Mercury there, we have a Mercury moon opposition with a Mercury retrograde that was just hit by the sun. That Mercury being hit by the sun, being illuminated by the sun, means that it's not just over the weekend, over this last weekend, that we have had, again, a realization, an acceptance, an aha moment. But really, it was the entire week, again, just kind of landing on, oh, this is my new reality. This is the role in my life now. One of the things I noticed too over the week, and just speaking with coaching clients in particular, is this is what I have wanted for a long time, and it doesn't necessarily feel the way that I thought it would. That's such a big revelation. It doesn't mean that they were disappointed with what they were living, but I think it has to do with a few things. I think that the energy that we're experiencing right now is not the easiest. That Jupiter square Saturn is just making things feel very slow. It can make things feel stagnant. And because of the signs that both of these planets are in, it can make us feel like we want to kind of break free and rip away from things, right? It's very Pisces is a very fluid flow-like energy in its highest expression, and Gemini is energy that wants to be free. It doesn't want to be contained. Gemini essentially is not an energy that is meant to be contained, because even as I'm explaining it to you, to contain that type of energy can feel very anxiety-inducing. Now, This isn't to scare anyone, but it is to validate any of the things that may be coming up potentially for you, but also because, again, of the conversations that I've been having over this last week. So, with this Mercury retrograde in opposition to the moon, we have the mind, we have our thoughts, realizations, aha moments, some clarity coming to the surface. Mercury's still retrograde, so we're still, again, we're still landing. And what we are recognizing in that opposition to the moon in Aquarius is this isn't how I used to feel about life. So, this isn't how I used to feel about life. This is very new, Aquarius. And here's another potential manifestation for some people. For some who have been working towards this change, towards this transition, great. The moon in Aquarius is the energy of I'm feeling the need for change, feeling the need, the moon for change, Aquarius, for a very different future, Aquarius, that I have not yet lived, Aquarius, that feels a little uncomfortable, Aquarius, and that's okay. I think for some people, they are moving through this change just fine or just day by day, moment by moment. For others, because we are talking about fixed energy. And when the moon comes into an air sign, particularly a sign like Aquarius, this can feel incredibly uncomfortable and potentially scary. Because we're talking about the recognition life is not what I thought it was going to be. And for some people, that's okay. It's still better than what it was, right? I would rather be here than there. Or the understanding of I would much rather leave everything behind or kind of sell all of my things and be there than to continue being here in this place where things feel inauthentic. This is a big deal. We are moving internally through a time in which I think that for some time we have anticipated some kind of change, some kind of transition, and we're finally landing on it, moving through it. Some people are already living it, and we're realizing the same things that used to bring me a sense of grounding and foundation are not the same things that are going to do that from this point forward. Wherever Uranus is involved, the moon is in Aquarius, co-ruled by Saturn and Uranus. I'll talk about Saturn in a second. But we have to talk about Uranus. Uranus, as much as it is liberating, as much as it is about things can be done differently. And if we dare, oops, sorry, if we dare to do things differently, that can actually be really great for us and we can trust ourselves, is a very destabilizing energy. One of the ways that came to me a very long time ago when I was a very young astrologer, I like to think of Uranus as the Tasmanian devil of the zodiac, okay? Think of Tasmanian devil coming into your home, doing what it does, destroying everything, making everything a mess, and then just leaving. The energy of Uranus can feel that way because what we're left with are the remnants of the mess brought on by this energy. And so we're kind of left we're kind of left in shock a lot of times. That's a very Uranian factor. We're kind of left with what the just happened, right? What did I just move through? And then we're left with the mess. But the mess that we're left with, as we start going through each piece of everything that was left by that Tasmanian devil disheveled, we get to choose what we keep, what we take with us, and what we toss out, what we let go of, what we donate, right? What no longer comes with us. So back to that Mercury in opposition to the moon. Mercury in Leo is about the creation, the creating of our reality of our life. But retrograde, it's about, I know it has to be different, but I've never done it this way before. Very simple example. Let's say that you're in a relationship that Maybe this is like your first serious relationship, and maybe you've never lived with someone before. Always wanted, this is a great person, you've grown with this person, and now it's time to move in together. That is very different, especially depending on what part of your life you're in, whatever you've done thus far on your own. This to me, because of the energy of Aquarius and Uranus, feels like I have done life in a particular way for so long by myself. And now I'm going to come together with this person and do life together with this person. This is great. This is beautiful. It's something I have always wanted, and it's still different and foreign, right? This doesn't mean that we don't love the person. This doesn't mean that we don't get to be excited, that we don't get to be happy, but it's very different because it is disturbing the pattern of how my life has moved thus far. Right? Let's say that this has to do with your work or your career in the world, right? I have worked a certain way for so long, and now I'm going to venture out on my own. Now I'm really going to write that book. I'm going to put it out in the world. And that gives me essentially a new identity. Maybe not in the eyes of everyone else, but to me, that is something that's shifting within. We are still landing on the newness of what's about to present itself. Now, Uranus actually does play a massive role in this full moon because we have the Sun Mercury conjunction in Leo on one end, we have then the moon in Aquarius on the other end. And at the leg of the T, because this is a T square, we have Uranus at 27 degrees Leo. Anything that is a square to Uranus is about things are going to change. The pattern in which things have functioned in, the order in which things have functioned in, is going to not just change, but perhaps feel like an abrupt ending, right? Whenever there's a square to Uranus, there's an abruptness to it that is very much out of our control. So for some people, this is going to play out externally, right? So this can mean like a loss of a job, I don't know, being evicted from a home without any like real notice or anticipation, right? These are some of the abrupt things that Uranus does to redirect us in what our soul, as I mentioned earlier, what our soul came here to actually experience. Now, does this mean that everybody's going to get evicted and everybody's going to, lose their job? No, these are just some examples of what actually happens. And remember, all of this has been a buildup. So for some people, these manifestations have very much already taken place. But what does that feel within? Let's say, you're safe at home. Your job is safe. What does this feel like internally? This can feel like a lot of restlessness and not understanding why. Right. So here we have a Mercury retrograde. We're trying to figure things out. We're trying to move forward with things. We're perhaps missing information. We're just landing. We're trying to figure out how to be like land in this new chapter of our life. The moon is in Aquarius. It's trying to pathologize potentially because the air signs are very intellectual and the moon is anything but. It's trying to pathologize and rationalize everything that we are feeling. And it's okay to not do that. It's okay to feel the feels. And the square to Uranus can activate that. The square to Uranus can bring on some anxiety, some restlessness. I'll share something very personal with you. Last week, I had a bit of an anxiety attack where I have not had one in years. And it was in the middle of the night, which was even scarier because I actually woke up and I felt the walls of the room close in on me to where I had to get up. I had to pace in my apartment and just kind of breathe. Again, this isn't the manifestation for everyone, but to me, I thought, I'm really moving through some heavy things here. And that's that moon square Uranus. We have been building up to this full moon in Aquarius. Now, what does this mean? What does all of this mean? in a few ways. I think one of the first things that is the most important is that we are truly being liberated from old patterns, old identities, old mindsets, old ways of thinking. And the way that we move through it, and perhaps some of the resistance that we have to those changes, is directly proportional to how easeful or not we may be experiencing this period of time. Now, I want to emphasize that if you're experiencing a lot of resistance, that's okay. This isn't an easy thing to move through, right? I mean, to me, that almost anxiety attack, I thought to myself, what it made very clear to myself was, oh man, I am really struggling with doing this part of my life differently. I am very attached to this other part of my life, and my body is feeling it. When the moon is activated and then Uranus is activated, Uranus rules the nervous system, especially in Taurus, because Taurus rules the senses, right? The moon rules a lot of the way that we feel. The nervous system is very activated right now. So, whatever thoughts are coming up, whatever your body is expressing and showing you, I think is a great barometer. I think it's valuable information to the depth and the degree of what we're actually moving through, right? Some people are getting restless sleep. Some people are feeling like they're having to move a lot. I mentioned that in last week's forecast leading up to this full moon as well. So all of this to say, it's very real. I think another thing that this full moon shows us in that square to Uranus is, from a much more metaphysical perspective, there are downloads that are happening. Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. Uranus is kind of like upgrading our thoughts, upgrading our belief systems. When we have upgrades, we feel it. We are really being invited to think beyond the parameters, to think beyond the rigidity of what we have been taught to think within. And so when that happens, as much as we may cognitively think we want that or that we are there, it's lunar events, especially lunar events like these, that show us just a little bit more. Let go just a little bit more. Open up just a little bit more. Think outside the box just a little bit more. And there's an expansion that's happening, right? So there's an expansion, and our nervous system, our bodies, are only used to a certain degree of expansion. And so we want to contract. But there's expansion that we cannot control, but we want to contract. It is a very natural thing to be happening right now with such activated energy. Another important aspect of this full moon is Venus and Virgo in opposition to Saturn retrograde in Pisces. Okay, so the other co-ruler of Aquarius is Saturn. What is Saturn doing? It's retrograde in Pisces. We are reconsidering the foundation. We are redoing parts of the foundation of our lives at the moment. And while Saturn remains retrograde, that is still working. And in Pisces, we are doing it in accordance to what feels the most aligned with our soul's purpose right now. We are doing it with what feels the most aligned with our sense of devotion, with actually wanting to devote something, to devote ourselves to our lives or to a certain part of our lives from a soul space. And I say that with the understanding that I think that means different things for different people. So take those words and ask yourself, what does that mean to me? What does devotion mean to me? What have I been taught devotion is? And is it something that drains me? Or is it something that gives me life, that gives me vitality again? Very important questions because these are the things that we're reconsidering. When Saturn goes retrograde, we are reconsidering the things that we are committed to, that we have a responsibility to understand how they affect us personally so that we don't go and project onto others later on when Saturn is direct. Okay, we have a responsibility first and foremost to ourselves to check our boundaries, our responsibilities, um, taking care of ourselves. Now, the opposition to Venus and Virgo. On the one hand, Venus and Virgo is really beautiful energy because I think that one of the things that Virgo teaches us is the gift of ceremony. Hear me out. Virgo is the sign in the zodiac that has the capability and the ability to see all of the little things, to be detail oriented. Virgo rules the part of the chart that has to do with our daily routine, with our habits, with our health. When you get into a routine, a rhythm in your life, when you take your supplements, your daily supplements at a certain time, before or after a meal, when you take your dogs on a walk at a certain time because you know that that's the best time, when you get up at a certain time because you have time for yourself, and then, for those of you who have children, to take the kids to school, when you don't eat past a certain time, all of that is ceremonious because it is a routine, because it is in devotion to yourself and your well-being. Venus in Virgo brings up the question of what is my relationship to those ceremonious things, if you will, that are for my greatest good. And so, on the one hand, we have that Venus and Virgo. What is my relationship to my routine, to my health, to my day to day, right? To the ceremony that is my life, in opposition to Saturn in Pisces. And how do those routines, the way that I do my life on a daily basis, support the foundation that I am currently recreating? Because if Uranus and this full moon in Aquarius has to do with we're in a transition and things are going to look very different from this point forward, our daily routines, the way that we take care of ourselves, the way that we do life, our very mundane lives is going to change. And how does that fit in to the new foundation of our lives? A very simple example, it can be, you have older children and they're going off to college, right? Okay. So school's about to start, or school has started for some people. Um, they're leaving the house and now you have the house all to yourself, and that hasn't happened for a long time. That can feel very abrupt, even though you saw it coming, even though you knew that was coming. That's a significant shift in the nervous system, in the body, in your home, all lunar themes, all moon themes. And now Venus and Virgo is saying, what does my day-to-day look like now? Right? What do I have more time for? What do I want to give more time for? One of the things that you want to be very mindful of, because we do have that Saturn retrograde in Pisces, is that you do take care of that heart. Because again, these changes are significant, and anything that is significant is going to make us feel a certain kind of way. Another thing that Venus and Virgo opposition to Saturn retrograde in Pisces can bring up: important conversations in relationships. So remember the example that I gave earlier. Perhaps, you're hitting a new milestone in a relationship, in a romantic relationship with someone. That's going to be very different. Your lives are going to look different, and you're moving through this slowly, right? I think that eclipse season is going to really solidify a lot of things for a lot of couples if you're in that space. Let's say that it's the rupture of a relationship. You are now figuring out, right? Again, what your life looks like without that person in it, how you're going to organize your life without that person in it. With the Saturn retrograde, it can be you're still giving each other stuff back, right? if this has to do with friendships or with business partnerships, Venus and Virgo, I think especially business partnerships, Venus and Virgo is a great time for those of you in business partnerships to get together to do some kind of audit, either, like financial audit or an audit of how you're doing things in this project in your company, and say, this is what we're going to take out. This is where we're going to, cut some things. This is what we're going to add. Virgo is very much an auditing sign. And with Mercury, it's ruler retrograde, perfect time for those types of things. With Saturn retrograde and then in a few months or in 2025, this is the new thing that we're going to do. This is how we're going to move forward. So this Venus-Saturn opposition, I think, can bring a lot of grounding, and I think can be the part of all of this lunar energy that can be very practical. If this is nothing to do with relationships for you, this is a great time to get your home in order, to purge, clean, take out things that you no longer need, especially as we move towards September and we're moving into eclipse season, which is all about change, which is all about welcoming new energy without trying to control anything, right? Because whenever eclipses are involved, this is much greater energy. This is our soul doing its thing. So during this full moon in Aquarius, it's a great time to clean out, I don't know, your hard drive, your closets, your garage, because all of that is energetic. But more than anything, what does this look like within is the biggest question really is how does my external reality, how do my habits, my relationships, my thought patterns, my belief systems support the life that I am trying to rebuild, that I am recreating for myself right now? Very, very important, because Saturn is involved. And remember, Saturn reminds us we are responsible first and foremost for ourselves. Notice that this is the second T-square in one lunar event. T-squares are aspects of tension. T-squares are aspects of something is changing and it very much feels out of my control, which can cause a lot of the other things that I've mentioned. And so the Jupiter-Mars conjunction in Gemini continues to be, I need more information, or I want more information, or these are all of the options and I don't know which one to pick. I don't know which one to choose. With Saturn, there is about taking things one thing at a time, one step at a time. One thing at a time, one step at a time. More importantly, have a lot of patience with yourself and the unfolding of things, especially over the next month. Now, one of the final things I want to mention is that the energy of this full moon is really going to be with us through the end of August, okay? And in last week's forecast, I mentioned, lean into your tools, grounding, yoga, meditation, whatever it is that helps you get centered and situated. But there was one of you who actually left a really lovely comment that I wanted to share with the rest of you, because I think that this is also important. A lot of times when we step into these tools, into these modalities, so that we can calm our nervous system, so that we can come back to center, there is an element of, there is an objective. There's something that we're going to gain out of it. And sometimes we don't gain what we desire to gain from being in a meditation space. And what she mentioned is, what if I just sit? What if I just sit without any agenda and just allow myself to be? And I think that that's so important, and it's just as valid, because a lot of times, again, these tools, they can have a lot of weight around them to work in a certain way, or we think they need to work in a certain way, that they need to have some kind of outcome. But when we really allow ourselves to just be with what's coming up, we are doing exactly that. We are just allowing ourselves to be. So that was just a friendly reminder that she gave me in the comments, and so I wanted to share with the rest of you. Another important thing is, again, this energy follows us through the rest of the month, through the rest of August. And on September 1st and 2nd, depending on your time zone, Pluto is going to retrograde back into the 29th degree of Capricorn, making its final transit through Capricorn for about the following 8 weeks. This is a buildup to that as well, which is why I mentioned that second full moon in Capricorn of July 21st earlier on in today's lesson. None of this happens on its own. Everything is always leading to something else, right? This is our life story unfolding, and the astrological events simply help to highlight certain moments of that journey, and it becomes our responsibility to understand how we feel in that moment, or at the very least be mindful of what's happening in that moment, because in those moments are where the lessons lie. And that is being mindful with our lives. That is being intentional with our lives. Even if we aren't doing something, it's not always about the doing, but it's about the being present enough to recognize the lessons that we are meant to recognize at that moment in time. Thank you all so much for your time, for coming back once again. Much love to you. Don't forget to leave all the stuff in the comments, and I will be replying throughout the week. Take care.